Over 600 years ago, when Europe had not yet mastered the oceans, an admiral of the Ming dynasty commanded the world's largest fleet, traversing tens of thousands of kilometers across the seas. He was Zheng He, but the greatest mystery isn't his voyages, but why this mighty fleet suddenly vanished from history. Part 1. The man who conquered the ocean before Columbus. Imagine, it was a foggy morning on the Yangtze River more than 600 years ago. The sound of war drums rang out. The trumpet's sound echoed through the mist. Thousands of sailors simultaneously hoisted their sails. The giant oars began to cut through the water. Already, slowly appearing before our eyes. Not one, not 10. Instead, there were hundreds of enormous ships, stretching all the way to the horizon. That wasn't the British fleet. Not from Spain. It's not Portuguese either, but it was the fleet of the Great Ming Dynasty, and the commander of that entire fleet. He is a man whose name is Zheng He. When we talk about the age of geographical exploration, most of us immediately think of familiar names: Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, or Ferdinand Magellan. European explorers changed the course of world history. But few people know that, decades before Columbus set foot in America, China has amassed a fleet so large that, even later European maritime powers could hardly match it. In 1492, Columbus set sail with 3 ships: Santa Maria, Nina, and Pinta. There were fewer than 100 sailors in total. It was the most famous voyage in history. But, nearly a century before that, an Asian man, he commanded a fleet of hundreds of warships. It brought tens of thousands of people with it, traveling tens of thousands of kilometers across the sea. Go to Southeast Asia, India, Persia, Arabian Peninsula, and all the way to the East African coast. That scale, even today, it continues to amaze historians. According to records from the Ming dynasty, during its maiden voyage in 1405, Zheng He's fleet consisted of approximately 317 ships, with nearly 28,000 sailors, soldiers, interpreters, craftsmen, officials, and envoys. It's practically a city floating on the sea. It's not just warships, and there were also ships carrying horses. Cargo ship. The ship carries fresh water. Medical ship, food storage, repair shop, and also ships specifically used to carry diplomatic gifts. This is not simply an expedition. It was an empire on the move, across the ocean. What's even more amazing, that's the size of the ships. According to many ancient documents, some of Zheng He's treasure ships are described as being over 120 meters long. Some documents even stated in larger font. If these numbers are completely accurate, they would then be much larger than Columbus's ship. However, today, historians still debate the actual size of the treasure ships. Some scholars suggest that records from the Ming dynasty may have been exaggerated, while many others believe that, despite being smaller than traditional figures, they were still among the largest and most advanced ships in the world in the early 15th century. Regardless of the calculation method, no one can deny that it was one of the most powerful fleets humanity had ever seen. But what makes Zheng He's story so strange? It's not about scale, it is forgetfulness. Nowadays, almost every student knows Columbus. Many people know Magellan, I know Vasco da Gama. But the name of Zheng He, it is also rarely mentioned outside of Asia. That's confusing. How could someone who once commanded the world's largest fleet, are they gradually disappearing from human memory again? The story gets even stranger. When we look at the historical context, early 15th century, the Ming dynasty was one of the wealthiest and most powerful empires on the planet. The shipyards are operating non-stop, trade developed, maritime technology has advanced, astronomy and cartography achieved many successes. While much of Europe is still gradually expanding its shipping routes, China has the capability to organize massive fleets of ships to cross the Indian Ocean, if we consider resources. At that time, the Great Ming dynasty had almost no rivals. Zheng He's voyages were not solely for exploration. They are also a statement to the world that there was an empire in the East wealthy enough to send hundreds of ships across the sea. It wasn't for colonial purposes, not for robbery. This was to establish diplomatic relations, trade, and assert the position of the Ming dynasty. In each region the train visits, all nations were astonished by the size of the fleet. Some places voluntarily sent envoys to China. There were places where tribute was offered. Some places have signed trade agreements. The influence of those voyages spread throughout the Indian Ocean, but then, something unexpected happened. Just a few decades later, that fleet disappeared. These ships once shook the oceans. No more sailing. The giant shipyards are gradually closing down. Many nautical charts have been lost. The long-distance voyages have ended. While Europe was beginning to enter the age of discovery, the empire that once dominated the seas has turned its back on the ocean. A turning point that changed world history. What happened? Why would a nation possessing advanced maritime technology and the world's largest fleet, are you voluntarily giving up the sea again? Was Zheng He merely a diplomat? An admiral? Or did he harbor a secret mission that history has yet to fully reveal? And more importantly, if those voyages had not stopped, would the world map today be completely different? To answer those questions, we need to turn back time. Let's go back more than 600 years, when a boy is born in the remote southwestern border region of China. I never imagined that fate would lead me to become the commander of the greatest fleet in history. Zheng He's extraordinary life. Part 2. From a prisoner boy to the most powerful man at sea. If we look at the legendary voyages of Zheng He, it's easy to think that he was born to be an explorer, an admiral, or a brilliant general. But the truth is quite the opposite. The life of Zheng He don't start at sea, but it all started in the middle of war, blood, terror, and the loss. In 1371, in the Yunnan region, in southwestern China, a boy was born into a Muslim family. His birth name was Ma Hua. The Ma family has been Muslim for many generations. According to many historical documents, Ma Hua's grandfather and father both made pilgrimages to Mecca. This suggests that his family had quite deep connections with the Islamic world. From a young age, Ma Hua had heard stories about caravans, merchants crossing the desert. These ships travel throughout the Indian Ocean, distant lands outside of China. Maybe it was those stories that instilled in the boy a thirst for discovery, but fate, and preparing a completely different path for him. At that time, the Ming dynasty was established shortly after overthrowing the Yuan dynasty of the Mongols. However, Yunnan remained one of the last regions not entirely under the control of the Ming dynasty. In 1381, the Ming army launched a major campaign to conquer this area. The battle was fierce. Many fortresses fell, the families broken apart. Thousands of people were taken prisoner. Among them, there was a boy named Ma Hua, only about 10 or 11 years old. According to historical records, Ma Hua's father is believed to have died in the war, and the boy, he was brought back to the capital as a war trophy. From that moment, Ma Hua's life took an unexpected turn. According to the customs of the Ming dynasty at that time, some of the captured boys would be taken to the palace to become eunuchs. Ma Hua was no exception. He was castrated when he was very young. It is one of the most painful punishments and events a person can experience. In feudal Chinese society, eunuchs were often viewed as a lower class. No family, no children, no right of inheritance. Few people would have thought that. A boy with that identity. There came a day when he became a man respected by the entire empire. After entering the palace, Ma Hua was assigned to serve a prince. That is, Zhu Di. He later became Emperor Yonggao. This was the most important turning point in his life. Unlike many other eunuchs who only stayed within the imperial harem, Ma Hua followed Zhu Di all the way to the army camp. He witnessed military campaigns, learned how to organize logistics, understand how to deploy troops. More importantly, he gradually became someone whom Zhu Di absolutely trusted. Historical records describe Ma Hua as an intelligent man. He has a very good memory. They have good observational skills, knowing multiple foreign languages, and especially, he possesses exceptional diplomatic skills. He was not just someone who knew how to obey orders, he also knows how to solve problems. That's what made him stand out among thousands of other eunuchs. Months and years passed. Zhu Di grew to appreciate this young courtier more and more. During numerous military campaigns in the north, Ma Hua always stayed close to his master. He witnessed the battlefield, understanding the psychology of soldiers, become familiar with the art of conducting. These are experiences that no school can teach. Then Chinese history entered a period of great upheaval. In 1398, Zhu Yuanzhang, the founding emperor of the Ming dynasty, has passed away. The throne was passed to his grandson, Chu Donvan. The new emperor wanted to reduce the power of the feudal lords. Among them was Zhu Di. The conflict quickly escalated. That led to a civil war that lasted for many years. Throughout history, this war is called the difficulty of the translation. Zhu Di revolted. March your troops towards Nanjing. And beside him, it was still the loyal eunuch Ma He. According to many records, Ma Hua doesn't just handle logistics. He also directly participated in many important tasks, organizational skills, loyalty, and calmness in dangerous moments. This made Zhu Di trust him even more. In the year 1402, Zhu Di was victorious. he ascended to the throne as emperor, taking the reign name as Vin Lac. He was one of the most powerful and ambitious emperors in Chinese history, and the first person he rewarded handsomely. It was Ma Hua. To acknowledge their contributions, Zhu Di bestowed the surname Zheng upon him, since Ma Hua became Zheng He. In Chinese culture, the emperors granting them this title was a special honor. It's not just about showing trust, and it's also a sign that he became the emperor's right-hand man. Since then, Zheng He's status rose rapidly. He was no longer an ordinary eunuch. He became one of the most influential figures in the court. They received orders directly from the emperor, being involved in important decision-making, and more importantly, he was one of the very few people Yongle absolutely trusted. This surprised many people. Why? A famously tough emperor, entrusting such important tasks to a eunuch again? The answer probably lies in the political context at the time. Yongle ascended the throne after a civil war. He was always concerned about officials and generals who came from opposing factions. Meanwhile, eunuchs like Zheng He doesn't have a powerful family backing him. He had no descendants to build his own power base. Therefore, the emperor often believed that they would be more loyal to the throne. Although that statement isn't always true, in the case of Zheng He, it opened up an unprecedented opportunity. A few years later, Vin Lac began to harbor a greater ambition. He wanted to consolidate power not only domestically, he wanted the whole world to know about the might of the great Ming dynasty. He wanted distant nations to submit to him. We want to expand our diplomatic and trade networks. To accomplish that, he needed someone who was loyal. He also has good organizational skills, brave, understanding many cultures. In the midst of the vast royal court, no one was more suitable than Zheng He. Emperor Yongle ordered the construction of a fleet unprecedented in history. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of sailors, a huge quantity of materials. A project that required the entire empire to mobilize resources for many years. And the one who was put in command of everything, it was the same boy who was a prisoner of war all those years ago. A person who once lost everything. He is now about to become the admiral, commanding the world's largest fleet. But what nobody expected was, those voyages would take Zheng He's name further than any other general of the Ming dynasty, and it also marked the beginning of one of the most magnificent chapters in the history of human maritime navigation. If you enjoyed the story of Miyamoto Musashi, please visit our channel for more fascinating videos about other mysterious stories. Part 3. The largest fleet in history. Emperor Yongle's dream of conquering the seas. Early 15th century. While many countries around the world are still grappling with war and division, so, in China, an emperor is pursuing an unprecedented dream. He did not want to rule only the mainland. He wanted the whole world to know about the existence of the great Ming dynasty. That person, it was Emperor Yongle. After seizing the throne through the Campaign of Tranquility, Vin Lac understood that he needed more than a military victory to solidify his legitimacy. Because in the eyes of quite a few people, he was still a king who ascended the throne by force. If you want your neighbors to submit, if you want history to remember you as a wise ruler, he had to prove that the great Ming dynasty was the center of the world. And the best way, it's about bringing that power out to sea. For centuries, Chinese merchants traded with Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. The maritime Silk Road continued to develop. Seaports like Quanzhou, Ningbo, and Nanjing are always bustling with ships. But no emperor had ever considered building a fleet large enough to astonish the world. Vin Lac will be the first. Around 1403, the order has been given. A series of shipyards across eastern China began operating around the clock. The sound of hammers striking wood echoed incessantly. Ancient tree trunks were transported here from all over. Carpenter, blacksmith, sailmaker, anchor maker. Tens of thousands of people participated in the project. It's not simply about shipbuilding. It was a nationwide campaign. The center of the complex is located in Longjiang, near Nanjing. This was one of the largest shipyards in the world at that time. According to many records, the dry docks here are so large that they can accommodate enormous ships. Nowadays, traces of the factory can still be found. Although many details in historical records remain controversial, no one can deny that this is one of the most massive shipbuilding projects in history. What made Zheng He's fleet so special? It's not just about quantity. It also depends on the way it's organized. If viewed from above, you won't see a chaotic train. Instead, it's a very well-organized team. In the center, these are treasure ships. These are the largest ships. It was also the residence of Zheng He and other high-ranking officials. Besides transporting people, these ships also carried gold and silver, silk, china, tea, and countless gifts for the countries the fleet would visit. They are like palaces floating in the middle of the ocean, surrounding the treasure ship. They are warships. Their mission was to protect the entire trade. Back then, the sea is far from peaceful. Pirates operate everywhere, especially in the Strait of Malacca. Without a strong military force, such a luxurious train would be an ideal target. Besides warships, the fleet also includes transport ships. The ship was carrying food supplies. Horse transport ship. The ship carries fresh water. Repair ship. Medical ship. And also ships that transport rare animals. This shows that the expeditionary force was prepared to operate continuously for many months, even many years. But it doesn't depend entirely on seaports. According to documents from the Ming Dynasty, the first fleet consisted of approximately 317 ships, nearly 28,000 people. Among them were not only sailors, and there's also soldiers, translate, physician, astronomer, craftsman, chef, diplomat, instrumentalist, and also scholars who specialize in documenting their journeys. In other words, it's like a mobile city on the sea. One of the issues that has sparked the most debate among historians. These are the actual dimensions of the treasure ships. Ming Dynasty History Book. Some of these ships were as long as about 44 fathoms. If converted using some traditional calculation methods, this figure could exceed 120 meters. If that's the case, they would be larger than any wooden ship ever built in the centuries to come. However, not everyone agrees. Many modern shipbuilding engineers believe that a wooden ship that long would present numerous structural problems. Large waves can cause the ship's hull to twist and crack. Therefore, some scholars estimate that the actual treasure ships may have been considerably smaller, approximately 60 to 90 meters. Although the exact dimensions are still debated, the point of agreement is these were still enormous ships by early 15th century standards. But a large ship, it is not possible to cross the ocean by chance. What made the Ming Dynasty fleet so powerful? It is marine technology. The Chinese used magnetic compasses very early on, during the Ming Dynasty. They also have detailed nautical charts. Learn to observe the positions of the stars, track the direction of the monsoon winds, take advantage of ocean currents. Thanks to that, the fleet was capable of traversing thousands of kilometers at sea with incredible precision. Another advantage, they have a very good understanding of the patterns of the Indian Ocean monsoon. At some point during the year, the wind will blow from east to west. A few months later, the wind direction reversed. This allows trains to travel to and from the destination in a natural cycle. Thanks to understanding that rule, Zheng He could plan trips that lasted for years. It's not just about focusing on technique. The Ming Dynasty also invested heavily in logistics. Thousands of tons of rice, salt, dried meat, bean, soft drink, medicine, loaded onto the ship. Doctors accompanied them to treat the illness. Repair technicians are always ready to fix any malfunctions. Even the replenishment of fresh water at the ports had been planned in advance. Every detail. All of this shows that this wasn't a spontaneous trip. It was an extremely well-prepared plan. However, what surprised many people the most? It was the fleet's target. When we talk about major voyages in history, we often think of conquest, colonial conquest, or search for gold and silver. But that wasn't Zheng He's top priority. On most trips, the fleet carried silk, china, tea, exquisite handcrafted items, to be presented as gifts to the monarchs. In return, they received local specialties, spice, gemstone, ivory, rare animals, and most importantly, it was an acknowledgement of the status of the great Ming Dynasty. That is, diplomacy through strength. No need to fire a single shot. The sheer size of the fleet alone would astonish many nations. When all the preparations are complete, in 1405, the drums sounded, signaling the start of the march. Hundreds of white sails simultaneously billowed in the wind. Over 28,000 people began to leave the dock. None of them knew that they were about to embark on the greatest maritime expedition Asia had ever witnessed. Ahead lies the vast ocean, lands I've never set foot in, completely different cultures, and those 7 voyages would etch Zheng He's name into history. But along with those peaceful encounters, that journey will also witness piracy, war, rebellions, and little-known naval battles. That's the story of the first ocean voyage, and we'll explore it further in the next part. Part 4. 7 Journeys That Changed the World. Summer of 1405. After years of preparation, the day that the entire Great Ming Dynasty had been waiting for finally arrived. The sound of drums echoed throughout Longjiang Harbor. The royal flags fluttered in the wind. Hundreds of ships lined up, one after another, stretching for kilometers. One by one, the white sails were hoisted. The sound of the rope tightening, the The sound of oars hitting the water. The cheers of tens of thousands of sailors mingled with the sound of the waves. It's not just a train leaving the station. That was the moment an empire decided to venture out into the open sea. At the bow of the largest ship, a man silently gazed towards the horizon. He is Zheng He. No one could have imagined that. His next 7 voyages will take him over 50,000 kilometers, visiting dozens of countries, and establishing him as one of the greatest navigators in history. The first voyage, the Great Ming Dynasty, appears before the world. The train departed from Nanjing, down the Yangtze River, head out to the East China Sea. The first stop is the coastal regions of Southeast Asia. Today, that route passes through Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. For many countries at that time, this was the first time they had seen a fleet of such enormous size. The ships were as tall as wooden buildings. White sails blanket the horizon. It brought tens of thousands of people with it. Many local chronicles describe people flocking to the seashore just to watch the train pass by. It was an unprecedented sight. But Zheng He did not come to invade. He carried an imperial decree from Emperor Yongle. They brought silk, porcelain, tea, gold, and silver, and countless other gifts. Every time we dock, the Ming Dynasty envoys will meet with the local king, give gifts, establish diplomatic relations, encourage trade. In return, countries sent envoys to the Ming Dynasty and participated in the tribute system. This is how the Ming Dynasty expanded its influence without building colonies like later European empires. The war against pirates. However, the sea has never been a peaceful place. Early 15th century, the Strait of Malacca is one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Simultaneously, it was also a haven for pirates. The most notorious figure at the time was Zheng He, a Chinese pirate leader. He controlled many trade routes, attacking merchant ships, looting goods. It even threatens countries in the region. Initially, Zheng He pretended to submit to Trin Hoa, but in reality, he plotted to attack the Ming Dynasty fleet. The plan was quickly discovered. Instead of waiting for the opponent to make the first move, Zheng He decided to attack first. According to records from the Ming Dynasty, the naval battle was extremely fierce. Dozens of pirate ships were sunk. Many others were seized. Zheng He was captured alive and escorted to Nanjing. He was later executed. This victory made the route through Malacca safer and enhanced the prestige of the Ming Dynasty fleet in the region. That also proves that, despite prioritizing diplomacy, Zheng He was still prepared to use military force when necessary. Heading toward the Indian Ocean, after conquering Southeast Asia, the fleet continued to advance westward. The next destination is India. This was one of the most important commercial centers of the Middle Ages. The seaports were bustling with ships from Persia, Arabia, and East Africa. When Zheng He's train arrived at the port, many merchants were astonished by the size of the fleet. Goods from China were quickly traded for pepper, cinnamon, sandalwood, precious stones, and many other rare commodities. It's not just about commerce. Meetings between envoys from both sides also contribute to strengthening diplomatic relations and cultural exchange. The confrontation in Sri Lanka, one of the most notable events, took place in Sri Lanka. According to historical records, the local king showed hostility towards the Ming Dynasty's delegation. The relationship quickly became strained. Even, documents indicate that the king's army attempted to encircle Zheng He's forces on the island. Facing a dangerous situation, Zheng He chose not to retreat. He organized a counterattack. The Ming Dynasty forces quickly gained the upper hand. The king was captured and taken to China. Afterward, he was released and allowed to return to his country after relations were re-established with the Ming Dynasty. This event shows that Zheng He was not just a diplomat, he was also a military commander capable of handling complex situations overseas. Arriving in the land of Arab merchants, after India, the fleet continued its course toward the Arabian Peninsula. The seaports of Hormuz were a meeting point for caravans of merchants from Asia, Africa, and Europe. Hormuz is famous for its pearls, perfumes, and gemstones. For the Ming Dynasty, this is a crucial link in the international trade network. The appearance of the Ming Dynasty fleet made a strong impression on the Muslim nations. As for Zheng He, this trip also holds special significance. Being born into a Muslim family, he was able to communicate and build relationships with many Muslim communities along the sea route. This contributes to making diplomatic missions run more smoothly. Reaching Africa. Maybe, the moment that surprised many the most was when Zheng He's fleet landed on the East African coast. The lands that are now Somalia and Kenya welcomed the Great Ming fleet. The exchange of goods was bustling. For the first time, the Chinese saw many strange animal species up close. Lion, ostriches, zebra, and especially An animal with a long neck has never been seen in China. That is, giraffe. When this special gift was brought back to Nanjing, it caused an immediate sensation. Many people believe that it is the qilin, a mythical creature from Eastern legends. That event was considered an auspicious sign for Emperor Yongle, even though today we know it was just a giraffe. But that story illustrates the magnificence of those sea voyages. Zheng He brought back more than just goods. He also brought back entirely new insights into the outside world. 7 voyages. From 1405 to 1433, Zheng He undertook a total of 7 ocean voyages. He visited more than 30 countries and territories, established diplomatic relations, expand trade. He sent hundreds of foreign envoys to the Ming dynasty. For nearly 3 decades, his fleet became a symbol of China's power and wealth. No Asian country at that time was capable of deploying a navy of comparable size. One question remains a subject of debate. But those voyages also left behind a mystery that has sparked debate among historians for decades. Official records confirm that Zheng He traveled to East Africa. That is no longer a matter of debate. However, could he go even further than that? Did the Ming Dynasty fleet really cross the Cape of Good Hope? Did they really ever set foot in America? Or even Australia? Before Christopher Columbus, this idea sparked one of the most famous debates in maritime history. Some people believe that Zheng He's massive ships were perfectly capable of doing that, while most modern historians believe that, to date, there is no reliable archaeological evidence or documentation to confirm that these voyages actually took place. So, what is the truth? What is merely a legend? That will be the mystery we explore in the next part.